Let's cut through the illusions. When a woman starts dating you, when she's initially interested, when she leans into the energy you're giving off, she's not actually curious about the real depths of your soul. She doesn't want to unpack your trauma, analyze your history, or sit down for a TED talk about your life's philosophy. What she's craving in those early moments, and even deep into the relationship, is how you make her feel, not who you really are. You could be carrying profound pain. You could be wrestling with existential questions. You could have just buried a part of yourself in silence after years of disappointment. But if you start expressing that too soon, if you bring her into that inner sanctuary of raw vulnerability too early, she doesn't see it as connection. She sees it as weight, as burden. And she didn't sign up for a burden. She signed up for a feeling, a vibe, an experience. And that truth is harsh, but it's also liberating. If you can stop pretending you're supposed to overshare to be loved, you've been lied to by pop psychology and rom-coms. You've been told that women want deep emotional conversations, that they want to see you cry, that they want intimacy. And while that might be true in controlled doses, the reality is that once you cross that invisible line from mysterious, composed man into overly transparent, emotionally heavy confessor, you kill the spark. Why? Because that spark is maintained by polarity. Masculine containment and feminine expression. She wants to express, she wants to feel, and she wants you to be the grounded force that can contain that expression, not match it. So when you start mirroring her emotional tendencies, she instinctively withdraws, not because she's cruel, but because in her mind, if you fall apart, who's holding the structure? And that's what they won't say out loud. Women desire a container, not a confessional. They fall in love with the vibe you give off, not the biography you carry inside. You ever notice how uninterested they are when you speak about your struggles? Not the surface ones, like a rough day at work, but the deep ones. The I don't know who I am anymore type. The I feel like I'm losing control of my life type. Suddenly she's quiet, awkward, not leaning in. Her warmth fades. She starts checking her phone more, and it hurts, because you thought being real was supposed to create connection. But this is the game that's never explained to men. The more serious your tone, the more she subconsciously feels the pressure of having to be your rock. And guess what? That's not what she's built for. She might say she wants the truth, but emotionally, she's wired to respond to the feeling of strength, not the logic of truth. She wants you to be stable, even if you're broken. She wants the illusion of wholeness more than the admission of fracture. And if you give her the fracture without wrapping it in masculine control, she pulls away, not because you're broken, but because you showed her too much. This is why so many men get blindsided. They open up, they reveal their darkest fears, they think they're being honest, noble, transparent, and maybe for a moment she listens. Maybe she even sheds a tear and says she's there for you. But watch closely in the days that follow. Her attraction begins to cool, her texts slow down, her tone becomes more distant. You didn't do anything wrong, you just broke a rule you didn't know existed. You shattered the emotional fantasy. Because the deeper reality is this: she never wanted to know the full weight of who you are. She wanted to know the part of you that made her feel alive, protected, adored. The version of you that had mystery, that didn't need to explain himself. That seemed like a fortress, not a diary. And when you gave her the diary, she felt the pressure to read it, to understand it, to make sense of it. But that isn't sexy to her. It's exhausting. And exhaustion never breeds desire. Women don't want real. They want real enough. They want the version of you that feels real without being too heavy. They want your confidence, not the roots of where it came from. They want your focus, not the pain that sharpened it. They want your masculine presence, not the path of suffering it took to build. If you show them too much of that path, they'll tell themselves they want to understand, but deep down, it overwhelms them. The more you reveal your scars, the more they see the wounds, not the warrior. And she didn't fall for a wound, she fell for the warrior. This is why men must learn restraint, not dishonesty, not repression, but containment. A man doesn't hide his truth, he simply knows how to guard it, how to frame it, how to hold it with poise. Because in a woman's emotional landscape, strength is not about being open, it's about being unchangeable in the face of chaos. There's a strange irony here. Women will say they want a man who's emotionally available, who isn't afraid to be vulnerable, and men take that at face value, thinking it means full access to their deepest insecurities, traumas, or philosophical confusion. But that's not what she means. What she means is, I want a man who understands his emotions but doesn't drown in them. She doesn't want to navigate the storm inside you. She wants you to already have navigated it yourself. When a man shares his emotional state, he better do it with power, with control, with ownership. Otherwise, it feels like he's offloading it onto her, and she begins to feel unsafe. Because if he's not anchored, then she can't relax into her natural feminine energy. And when she's forced into the masculine role, being the one who carries, fixes, or analyzes, her attraction dies like a flame without oxygen. What she wanted was warmth. What she got was work. You'll notice this, especially when you try to have serious life talks early on. Try telling a woman on a second or third date that you're questioning your purpose in life, or that you're going through a phase of existential emptiness, and watch her enthusiasm shrink. Why? Because it doesn't fit her archetype of what a man is supposed to bring. She came for the fire, the stability, the emotional frame, not an open-ended essay about your metaphysical discontent. When you get serious, her feminine spirit doesn't rise, it recoils. She may nod politely, but emotionally she's tuning out. Not because she's heartless, but because her emotional DNA is wired to seek security, not uncertainty. And when you start unpacking too much of your inner reality, it introduces an instability that she's not prepared to carry. In fact, she starts questioning your whole value in her subconscious. She wonders, if he's still figuring out who he is, why am I trusting him to lead? This is why so many strong, intense, and introspective men get rejected and confused. They think that being real, being open, being sincere should count for something. But in dating and relationships, sincerity without strength is just weakness, dressed up in noble clothing. It doesn't captivate, it doesn't spark desire, it doesn't awaken that magnetic polarity women respond to. You think you're building emotional intimacy, but all you're doing is building emotional fatigue. And she starts to resent you, not because of who you are, but because you didn't play the role she was unconsciously craving. She wanted the calm eye of the storm, not the hurricane of your inner dialogue. She wanted the man who's been through hell but doesn't need to talk about it to validate himself. That's the paradox. Your darkness can attract her, but only if it's silent, quietly felt, powerfully held, shown through your energy, not your words. The masculine mystery is your greatest weapon, not because it's manipulative, but because it creates a sacred boundary, and boundaries create respect. When she knows there are parts of you she can never fully touch, never fully understand, she becomes drawn to them. That's the irony. The more you reveal, the less fascinating you become. But when you hold something back, not out of fear, but out of self-respect, she feels the presence of a man who values himself. She feels a man who isn't desperate to be understood, and that lack of need becomes irresistible. She starts chasing your energy. She starts leaning in, because she realizes that this man doesn't beg for emotional validation. He doesn't offer up his soul like a resume. He lives it, and in that, she feels both safe and intrigued. She doesn't want to know you entirely. She wants to feel you. And the feeling of a strong man, it lives in what he withholds. So stop thinking that connection comes from explanation. It doesn't. It comes from vibe, from grounded presence, from silent power. When she leans in and asks, "What are you thinking?" she's not asking for a philosophical monologue. She's asking for emotional leadership. She's hoping you don't talk too much. She's praying you don't over-explain. Because the moment you start intellectualizing everything, the magic dies. Women live in a world of emotion. They navigate by feeling, not fact. So when your conversations become too logical, too personal, too confessional, she feels the spark evaporate. And the tragic part, most men never even realize it. They keep digging their own graves with words, hoping that sincerity will lead to love. But love, at least attraction, doesn't grow from deep conversation. It grows from mystery, from containment, from the man who knows that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. There's something primal in how women test for strength, not by challenging your muscles, but by poking your emotional core. When they ask about your past, your struggles, your fears, they're not always looking for the answer. They're observing your reaction. Do you flinch? Do you try to explain it all away? Do you lose your masculine composure? That's the test. And most men fail it by thinking the answer matters more than the energy it's delivered with. But here's the secret. Women aren't looking to know you, they're looking to feel you. And when your energy feels centered, stoic, untouchable, then you become desirable. Not because you hid your truth, but because your truth didn't shake you. The mistake is thinking that sharing everything makes her closer to you. What she actually respects is the man who carries his truth without needing to bleed it all over her lap. Think about the men women obsess over in stories, movies, novels. Are they ever the oversharing types? No, they're calm, composed, guarded. They reveal themselves through action, not explanation, and women fall hard for them. Why? Because these men embody the archetype of masculine self-possession, the man who could speak but chooses not to, the man who feels everything but leaks nothing. He holds his seriousness behind a silent wall, and women don't want to tear that wall down. They want to be invited past it, but only a little, just enough to feel special, just enough to wonder if she's the only one who gets to see that side. If you give it all away too fast, your trauma, your fears, your pain, you rob her of that mystique. You turn yourself from a man into a journal, and she doesn't want to date your journal. She wants to date the storm you survived and the calm you became because of it. This is why your pain, your trauma, your serious side has to be alchemized into strength before you bring it into a relationship. Women don't want to process it with you. They want to witness the man who has processed it already. That's what's attractive. You can't use her as your therapist. That's the fastest way to become a burden. Not only does it destroy sexual polarity, but it shifts her perception of you from lover to liability. And once she sees you as something she has to fix or save, the attraction is gone, so you keep your pain private. You express it through your discipline, your growth, your mission, not through nightly confessionals. You become the kind of man who turns his chaos into clarity, then walks into a room with that clarity dripping off his skin. That's the man she'll trust. That's the man she'll want. Because that's the man who doesn't need her emotional permission to be powerful. Even when she asks, "Tell me everything about you," don't be fooled. That doesn't mean she wants everything. It means she wants to feel like she's discovering you. Not that you're dumping your life story into her lap like a resume. Women crave unfolding, not information. They want the gradual unveiling of a man's depth, a slow burn, a mystery that makes them want to keep exploring. And every time you tell her something serious about yourself, it should feel like a moment of sacred trust, not a therapy session. So you give just enough, just a glimpse, just a hint, and then you pull back. Let her curiosity do the work. Let her earn the next layer. Because when a woman feels like she has full access to you too soon, she doesn't feel closer. She feels bored. Mystery isn't deception. It's masculine discretion. And when you master that, she'll never stop craving your presence. The bitter truth is that men who overexpress often end up resented. Not because their truth was wrong, but because their delivery was weak. A man who talks too much about his hardships becomes exhausting to the feminine. Not because women are cruel, but because they are sensitive to emotional load. Their biology is wired to assess, can I relax around this man, or will I have to carry him? And if you flood her with too much reality, too much pain, too much inner dialogue, she begins to feel that you're the one leaning on her. And the minute that dynamic sets in, the polarity is reversed. The attraction fades, because in her heart, she's not looking for someone to mother. She's looking for someone to surrender to. That surrender only comes when your energy says, no matter what I've been through, I got this, and I don't need you to understand it to prove it. In fact, when you share too much too soon, she doesn't just lose interest, she loses trust. It may sound backwards, but oversharing too early tells her that you don't have boundaries. It tells her you're trying to buy closeness with emotional currency, that you're so desperate to be known that you'd hand your soul to someone you barely know. And women know, deep down, that a man who doesn't guard his own depth will never guard her emotions either. So you think you're bonding, but what she feels is a man who has no gatekeeping power, a man who leaks his essence freely, hoping to be understood. And women don't admire men who hope to be understood. They admire men who are already anchored, who don't need her to comprehend the weight of their world because they've already mastered it. That's the silent power that makes her respect you. not your truth, but the way you carry it. You have to realize, a woman doesn't fall in love with a man's story. She falls in love with his presence, his ability to lead a room without saying a word, his calm when chaos hits, his focus when emotions run high. You think telling her about your struggles will draw her in, but she doesn't want the man inside the struggle. She wants the man who came through the struggle and emerged composed. It's not about hiding your truth, it's about mastering it before you deliver it. So when she sees that look in your eyes, the one that says you've been to war with yourself, but you returned with a crown of fire, then she leans in. Then she's hooked, not because she knows everything about you, but because she knows there's something untouchable about you, something sacred, and she doesn't need the whole story. She just wants to stand near the energy that made you a man. Look around at how the world raises men to speak more, cry more, open up more, especially in dating, and yet, the same world watches these men get ghosted, rejected, and friend-zoned, while the emotionally distant, mysterious ones get chased. Why? Because attraction is primal, and the feminine craves polarity, not parity. It doesn't want a mirror, it wants a force. When you're too open, too verbal, too eager to connect on every deep topic, she begins to mother you in her mind. And once she mothers you, she can't desire you. That's the shift, and it's subtle. It happens in the spaces between your long monologues. It happens when your honesty starts to feel like neediness, and she starts looking elsewhere, not for words, not for heart-to-hearts, but for a man who doesn't explain himself, who just is, who commands presence like a mountain, not because he talks about the storms he survived, but because you can feel them in his silence. You ever notice how a woman will ask, "Why don't you talk more?" or "You never open up to me," yet she's still obsessed with you? That's not a contradiction. That's her feminine instinct trying to figure you out, and that curiosity is gold. The moment she feels like she fully knows you, the moment there's no mystery left, she loses that itch to explore, and you become predictable, safe, emotionally accessible, yes, but energetically dead. What you need to understand is this: her attraction is built on the unsaid, the quiet glance, the subtle strength, the way you handle pressure without turning it into poetry. If she says you don't talk enough, but her body keeps coming closer, trust the truth in her actions. She wants to feel you, not interview you. And the moment you stop trying to explain yourself is the moment she finally starts wanting you more than ever. So what should you do? Simple. Master your world, then say less. Show her who you are with presence, not paragraphs. Let your silence be the frame through which she views your strength. Let your emotional restraint be the proof of your internal security. Don't fall into the trap of confusing openness with strength. Openness without boundaries is weakness disguised as sincerity. Real strength is being so grounded in who you are that you don't need validation, sympathy, or deep talks to feel seen. You see yourself, you've processed your story, and now you wear it in your posture, your eyes, your decision-making. That's what she wants to feel. That's what makes her crave you. Not the man who spills his soul hoping to be loved, but the man who already loves himself enough to protect his essence. That's the paradox. The less you try to connect, the more connected she'll feel. There's an irony here that men who've been broken, betrayed, or left for being too open often don't realize until it's too late. It's not your vulnerability that hurt you, it's the neediness behind it. You didn't just share your wounds, you bled out in her hands and expected her to hold you together. And while that may sound poetic, it kills attraction instantly. Women don't respect a man who bleeds for attention. They respect a man who wears his scars like a crown, not because he hides them, but because they no longer control him. You may think being raw, expressive, and emotionally real is the key to her heart, but in the primal world of desire, what she craves is a man who's already done that inner battle alone and came back without needing applause. This is why men who move like myths get treated like legends. The less you explain yourself, the more her imagination fills in the gaps. And that space, that unknowable silence, that's where her obsession grows. You don't want to be the man who's easy to figure out. You want to be the man she can't stop thinking about. The man who says just enough to hint at a storm inside, but never enough to give her the map. That's the seduction. That's the gravity. When you become an emotional mystery, she becomes an emotional detective, and the more she has to chase the truth, the more she bonds with the image of you she creates. Not the full you, not the real you, but the fantasy of you. And that fantasy is far more powerful than any confession you'll ever make. Masculine energy is not about being closed off, it's about being centered. It's not about silence for the sake of being cold. It's silence because your world is already ordered. You're not avoiding depth, you've already dived deep, and now you live with the wisdom of it. You're not hiding emotions, you've mastered them. So when she tries to drag you into emotional spirals, you don't flinch, you don't explain yourself, you observe. And that observation, that calm, collected detachment drives her wild, because you represent the one thing she can't create herself, internal stillness. You become the anchor in her chaos, the eye of the storm, not because you talk about it, but because you are it. Too many men today are being taught that if they just open up, everything will fall into place. That vulnerability is the key to connection. But vulnerability without earned masculine grounding is just self-sabotage. If you haven't conquered your own emotions, your sharing is just dumping. And women don't want to be dumped on, they want to be led. They want to feel safe in your presence, not overwhelmed by your inner storm. And the safety they seek doesn't come from words, it comes from presence, from control. From a man who knows himself so deeply that he no longer needs to be seen to feel significant. He already sees himself. He doesn't need her to understand. He needs her to feel what he is. So remember this, it's not that women don't care about your pain, your dreams, your fears. It's that they only respect a man who has transformed them, who has already walked through the fire and doesn't smell like smoke anymore. A man who doesn't bleed when poked, who doesn't rant when rejected, who doesn't pour his heart out on command just to keep her interested. She'll never love your story more than your power, never love your words more than your aura. And the man who understands this, who leads with presence, not explanation, becomes unforgettable, because he gives her what no open diary of a man ever could, the feeling of being in the presence of something rare. And that feeling, brother, is what keeps her coming back.